And the fact that we had nice voices, I think, came from both my mother and father. My father was born in Hungary, was about 6 years old when he came here. His father was 18 and learned to speak English as you and I do, without an iota of accent, because he hated Europe and he really wanted to be American.
Okay, you want to tell me about Robert Mitchum?
The story you mentioned, Robert Mitchum. I think Robert Mitchum's story that I know happened in my office is a wonderful one, because I never worked with him. Mervyn LeRoy, the director, was making 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. And he said to me, Lillian, Mervyn had a real nose for talent. He loved it. And he said, Lillian, go and see the dailies. There's a young man you go and see. And it was Mitchum and Van Johnson in that famous scene on board ship. And I called Mervyn back and said, he's really got it. He said, can I send him to the office? I said, yes, now. Came in, my office was a room larger than this. And not in the new building, the old, on the studio lot. And I had a grand piano. It was furnished like a living room. And there was a big kind of green wing chair. I was always so small, my feet didn't touch sitting in a chair. I sat on a hassock because I was comfortable that way. I came in, said, how do you do? I said, will you have a seat? I said, I saw your dailies. They were really very good. I want to congratulate you. He said, thank you, ma'am. I said, have you worked in films before? Yes, ma'am. Do you like being an actor? Yes, ma'am. Do you intend to go on being an actor? Yes, ma'am. I never got more than yes, ma'am, or no, ma'am, for about at least 15 minutes of my asking questions. He never said one other word except yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. And I finally said to him, you're going to be an actor, you are. But don't let anybody ever change you. Don't let anybody ever change one thing about you. He said, no, ma'am, thank you, ma'am, and goodbye. And that was my entire interview that he remembers me, and he did, because we would meet, in social affairs. I came to MGM the day after Irving Thalberg was buried.
Well, but you were certainly there when Crawford was there, right? Joan Crawford.
But she was a star. I never knew her. I never worked with her. I knew about her.
Right.
But I really, possibly just saying, how do you do was more than anything
Who was
else.
the first big actress who became a big star that you ever worked with when you were first starting there?
That became a star?
Yes, someone you discovered. Could even be Margaret O'Brien. I know you really went to
No,
that.
it was before Margaret.
Right.
Lana Turner.
Oh, tell me that. Tell me about it.
Lana Turner.
And tell me how you came to meet Lana Turner and what she was like.
Well, Lana Turner was signed to MGM, dear. She came to me. She heard about me. She came, but that was before she was a star. I worked with her almost from her first picture, from the Hardy picture, which was the first picture at MGM, I think. I believe you would have to, but I believe that was the first one.
And what was unique about her? What did you see in Lana?
Oh, I knew that she could be, dear. I knew, there wasn't any question. When she was doing Ziegfeld Girl, I was not married. I lived in an apartment on Olympic Boulevard. You walked up, there wasn't an elevator. That's where I first taught Lana to walk down the stairs in Ziegfeld Girl. Then I took her on the set where she was going to walk down those stairs, and nobody ever did it greater than she did. And the scene, I don't know if you remembered in Ziegfeld Girl, between Dan Daly, who played a fighter and then he was a drunk, and he slaps her in a saloon when she'd been drinking in a bar. It was a great scene in the picture. They rehearsed that scene in my apartment on a Sunday afternoon. And I said to Danny afterward, I said, you better really sock her, because she's going to play that scene beautifully. And unless you really hit her, you're not going to get the reaction you should get.
Charlton Heston told me
No,
that.
I think Lana, I worked with others, but I think Lana really was one of the first that I worked with that really became a big star. For me, actually, it's when you say beauty, real beauty, Lana had the most beautiful back, kind of skin and wonderful hands. Ava was, in my book, a true beauty. Ava would come in a shirtwaist and skirt and no stockings, kick off the shoes. The feet were as beautiful as every other part of her. That's all I can tell you about Ava's beauty. No makeup, nothing.
Louis B. Mayer had you auditioning all these little girls, and that you told Mr. Mayer, it's Margaret O'Brien and I'm seeing no other children. And I want to hear that story and tell me why you knew that it was Margaret O'Brien.
Well, when you've gone through about 50 little girls and you've made them scream and say, you know which one is really screaming, which one. Remember, Margaret couldn't read. She learned the words from hearing them. And when you saw that child, that little tiny child, sitting in that big chair, as Mr. Van Dyke said as he saw her, because that's who I brought in, the director and the producer, did every scene that she was going to do in that picture. And then the dialogue was that if something wasn't right on the set, Mr. Van Dyke would say, ask Burns. But that's the way Margaret learned. And when you saw this little tiny child who was like a little doll, you could pick her up that way, scream so that your blood curdled, you knew that audience's blood was going to curdle. Because you see, if there's anything you can say about film and the difference between film and going on a stage, that camera is a truth machine. You can't say dog and think cat, because meow is going to come out and not bow wow. That's exactly what it is in my book, A Truth Machine.
And how old was she?
I don't think she was more than 3.5 to 4. She was tiny.
So was that the first thing she did? That thing with Jimmy
Yes, yes, that was the first thing. And her mother came with her, and her aunt, who was a very pretty little girl, young girl, I should say, not little girl. But
did you coach her for that? For that with Jimmy Cagney?
no, not for the Jimmy Cagney picture, because that wasn't at MGM. No, she did a little bit in a musical that Arthur Freed did before she did.
I mean the war one, the one where she's the child, or the different children from the different countries.
Oh, that was Journey for Margaret, darling.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh,
she described it as a short for the war.
It was, darling. It was the war in England, dear. They heard bombs, and that was the screaming. One little boy, that's when I went upstairs and said, "This is it. We have them, and otherwise don't send another one to me." Because the little boy the mother was saying, "Scream," pushing him. One mother I put out of the office, and I said, "If I ever hear of you taking this child on a studio, I'll report it to the authorities." But one little boy finally said to me, "I hate you. I hope you die." And I didn't blame them. I was, pushing them to scream, to carry on, telling them their father was dying. How do you make a child, cry and scream? With Margaret, it wasn't that difficult. I told her the story. I told her a big bomb was falling, and she screamed, and she cried.
And who was the little boy?
Oh, I don't even remember his name.
It wasn't Dean Stockwell.
No, not the one that he played the part.
Did you coach Margaret and Dean Stockwell for The Secret Garden?
Dean Stockwell, in my considered opinion, could have been the greatest actor there was of that time. Dean Stockwell was loaded with talent. He's done well, but